Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was manipulated by Loki and became a god of misdirection. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind on the rooftop was a liar. It whispered of freedom, of flight, of endless possibility, the same promises the city lights glittering below had always made to him. But Izuku Midoriya knew the truth now. The wind was just a cold, empty thing that pushed against you, and the lights were just distant fires, uncaring and unreachable. Gravity was the only truth left in his world. It was a heavy, patient thing, pulling at the soles of his worn red sneakers, at the tears that refused to fall, at the hollowed-out space in his chest where a dream had lived and died only moments ago. All might was gone. The skeletal form of the symbol of peace had vanished down a stairwell door, his words still echoing in the hollow chamber of Izuku's skull, sharper than any villain's blade. It's not bad to dream, kid. But you have to be realistic. Realistic. The word was an acid, dissolving the very foundations of his identity. For 15 years, Izuku Midoriya had been synonymous with a single, impossible dream. To be a hero, to save people with a fearless smile. Just like All Might. It was the core of his being, the engine that drove him to scribble in his notebooks, to study heroes with a scholar's devotion, to face down bullies with trembling legs and clenched fists. Without that dream, what was he? A quirkless, useless, fragile boy. Deku. His hand trembled as he reached for the notebook that lay discarded on the grimy concrete. The sludge villain had turned it into a soggy, warped mess, and Katsuki Bakugo's explosive temper had seared the edges, leaving them blackened and brittle. The cover, once a cheerful yellow, was now a sad, mottled brown. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The title was a cruel joke. He traced the scorched caricature of his own face. The ink bubbled and distorted into a grotesque mask. He opened it. The pages, stiff with dried sludge, cracked at his touch. All Might's signature, a bold, sprawling monument to his shattered faith, took up 2 whole pages, a prize from a battle he'd only gotten in the way of. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone rose from the paper, a scent he now associated with failure. With a choked sob that was more of a gasp, he snapped the book shut. The journey down from the roof was a blur. Each flight of stairs was a descent deeper into his personal hell. The bustling city street, which he usually navigated with a fanbus wide-eyed wonder, felt alien and hostile. The towering billboards of heroes, Endeavor's fiery glare, Best Jeanist's cool pose, Empty Lady's wink, were no longer sources of inspiration. They were mocking idols of a church that had excommunicated him. They were all part of the club, the exclusive society of the powerful, and he was the permanent outsider staring through the glass. He didn't know how long he walked. The sun bled out of the sky, staining the clouds in hues of orange and purple before finally succumbing to the deep, bruised indigo of twilight. His path was aimless, his feet moving on an autopilot fueled by misery, taking him on a circuitous route that seemed engineered to delay the inevitable moment he would have to face his mother. How could he look her in the eye? How could he tell her that the dream she had so tearfully supported, the one he had clung to like a life raft, had finally, officially, drowned? He found himself standing at the entrance to a small, forgotten park nestled between 2 looming apartment complexes. It wasn't one of the pristine, well-manicured public spaces of the city center. This one was older, neglected. The paint on the swing set was peeling, the sandbox was a weed-choked pit, and only one of the overhead lamps flickered with a weak, sickly yellow light. It was a place for shadows and secrets. It was perfect. He shuffled over to a splintered wooden bench beneath the boughs of a gnarled old tree, its leaves already starting to rust with the coming of autumn. He sat down, the weight of the day, of his entire life, pressing down on him until he hunched over, his elbows on his knees. He placed the ruined notebook beside him, a tombstone for his aspirations, and then, in the suffocating quiet of the lonely park, the dam finally broke. There was no sound. Just silent, racking tremors that shook his small frame. Tears streamed down his face, hot and thick, dripping from his chin onto his trousers. It was a grief so profound it had no voice. He cried for the little boy in the All Might onesie, for the years of pointless study, for the countless burns and bruises from Bakugo, for the pitying looks from his teachers, and for the final, devastating pity from his own idol. He cried because he was quirkless in a world that equated power with worth. He was a faulty product, a misprint, a joke the universe had forgotten to laugh at. He held up his hands in the flickering lamplight. They were small, scarred from playground scuffles and mishaps, but ultimately unremarkable. Useless. They couldn't produce fire or ice, couldn't stretch or harden. They could only grip a pen to write about the greatness of others. A bitter, hysterical laugh tried to bubble up his throat, but it died as a strangled cough. Worthless. The thought was his own, but it felt as if it had been spoken aloud, as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. He flinched, looking around the empty park. There was no one there, just the whispering leaves and the distant, droning hum of the city. He must be losing his mind. Then came the voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a booming declaration or a villain's menacing growl. It was smooth, like silk being drawn over polished stone, a baritone whisper that seemed to slither directly into his consciousness, bypassing his ears entirely. It was amused, not worthless. Overlooked. There is a significant difference. Izuku shot to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Who's there? He called out, his voice cracking with fear and residual grief. Is this a villain's quirk? His analytical mind, the one thing he had ever been proud of, kicked into gear despite the terror. Voice-based quirk? Mental intrusion? Illusion? The shadows under the old tree seemed to deepen, to coalesce into something more than just an absence of light. But no figure emerged. The voice came again, laced with a condescending sort of sympathy. A villain? A hero? My dear boy, you're still thinking in their terms. How pedestrian. I am merely an observer. A friend, perhaps, to the unfairly discarded. Izuku's eyes darted around, trying to pinpoint the source. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Show yourself. A low, rich chuckle echoed in his head. What is there to see? I am an idea. A possibility. The same thing you were, until a few moments ago. Tell me, Izuku Midoriya, what does it feel like to have your god tell you there is no room for you in his heaven? The question struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was too precise, too personal. This thing, whatever it was, knew. It had been watching. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through him. How do you know? He stammered. I was drawn to the scent of a dying dream. It is a potent, intoxicating aroma. And yours was a supernova of hope collapsing into a black hole of despair. A truly magnificent spectacle. The voice was devoid of malice, speaking with the detached appreciation of a connoisseur. He was right, you know. The walking skeleton. Izuku flinched as if he'd been slapped. No. Oh, yes. The voice purred, its silken tones wrapping around his thoughts. In this world, in their rigid, laughably simple game of heroes and villains, you cannot win. You lack the prerequisite for entry, a quirk. A blunt instrument for a blunt age. Every word was a confirmation of his deepest fears, yet hearing them from this strange, unseen entity was different. It wasn't pity. It was a statement of fact. So you're just here to mock me? Izuku asked, his fears slowly being replaced by a spark of his old, stubborn defiance. Mock you? Child, I have come to applaud you. This was so unexpected that it stunned Izuku into silence. That notebook. The voice continued, and Izuku could almost feel a phantom gesture towards the ruined object on the bench. I have been observing your work for some time. It is not the diary of a drooling famba. It is a manuscript of strategy. A codex of weaknesses. You see the world not as a playground, but as a chessboard. You analyze, you deconstruct, you predict. You see the flaws in everyone's armor, the cracks in every hero's facade. While they are busy admiring the strength of a punch, you are calculating its cost and property damage, the angle of impact, the recovery time. Izuku stared at the notebook. The voice was describing his process, his secret passion, with an accuracy that was both thrilling and terrifying. No one had ever understood. To everyone else, it was just his creepy, obsessive hobby. That mine? The voice whispered, its tone turning conspiratorial, seductive. That is a weapon more potent than any fire-breathing quirk or super strength. But you've been trying to use it to emulate them. You've been trying to fit your brilliant, complex key into their brutishly simple lock. And now you are broken because it wouldn't turn. He sank back onto the bench, his legs suddenly weak. The entity understood him. In a way, it felt like it understood him better than his own mother, better than even himself. But what else is there? Izuku asked, his voice barely audible. Without power, a mind is useless. Power? The voice dripped with theatrical disdain. You speak of power as if it is a single, monolithic thing. The power to punch a hole in a building. The power to run fast. How utterly droll, how lacking in imagination. Is the puppeteer not more powerful than the puppet? Is the playwright not more powerful than the actor who speaks his lines? The power they celebrate is loud, clumsy, and obvious. True power, the kind that changes the world, is silent. It is invisible. A faint shimmer of emerald and gold light flickered in the deepest part of the shadows under the tree, a brief, impossible glint, like a cat's eyes in the dark. The Heroes' Society is a sham, Izuku Midoriya. A beautiful, glorious, profitable sham. It's a stage play, and the actors have forgotten they are acting. They fight villains in choreographed ballets of destruction, mouthing platitudes about justice while their merchandise flies off the shelves. Endeavor, your number 2 hero, saves a dozen people while causing millions in damages and terrorizing his own family. Is that heroism? Or is it just ego with a license? The words resonated with a dark truth Izuku had always pushed to the back of his mind. The times he tallied the collateral damage, the civilians who were injured in the crossfire, the focus on rankings and media appearances. He had always justified it, rationalized it as a necessary part of the job. But hearing it laid bare by this dispassionate observer felt like a revelation. I am offering you a different path, the voice said, its tone shifting from critique to proposition. Not the path of a hero in their definition. Not a brawling colossus or a human flamethrower. I am offering you the chance to be something far more effective. A hero of the mind. A savior of circumstance. I don't understand, Izuku whispered, his mind reeling. They want to save people with a punch. You will save them with a word. A thought. A nudge. You will make the villain trip on a crack in the pavement he suddenly didn't see. You will make the sniper's hand tremble as he remembers a forgotten failure. You will make a rampaging brute see an illusion of his beloved mother in the path of his charge, stopping him dead in his tracks. You will save hundreds, thousands, without throwing a single punch. The scenarios played out in Izuku's mind with vivid clarity. It was elegant. It was precise. It was a form of heroism that relied on the very thing he possessed in abundance, his intellect. But it was also dishonest. It was trickery. That's not being a hero, he argued, the ingrained lessons of his childhood fighting back. That's lying. It's manipulation. A sigh, long and full of ancient weariness, filled his head. And what, pray tell, is a hero's fearless smile as he faces down certain death? Is it not a lie? A beautiful, necessary lie to give the terrified citizens hope? What is a costume and a flashy name if not a piece of theater designed to create a larger-than-life illusion? Your entire world is built on misdirection, child. I am simply offering you the power to become its master, instead of its victim. The voice softened, becoming almost gentle, a stark contrast to its cynical worldview. Imagine it. You standing among the titans. They will see a quirkless boy, an underdog, but you and I will know the truth. You will be the ghost in the machine, the architect of their victories. You will guide their fists and foil their enemies, and they will never even know you were there. They'll see a hero. The voice whispered, the words coiling around Izuku's desperate heart. But you and I will know you are something more. You will be their salvation, wrapped in a beautiful lie. Salvation in a lie. The phrase was both horrifying and intoxicating. It was a perversion of everything he believed in, and yet, it was a path. It was a chance. It was more than All Might had offered him. He looked at his hands again. They were still shaking, but now it wasn't just from fear. It was from the terrifying thrill of possibility. All his life he had been told no. No quirk, no chance, no hope. This voice, this shadow, this idea, was the first thing in the universe to look at his defining weakness and call it a strength. His desperation was a gaping wound, and Loki's words were a potent, addictive anesthetic. The pain of the rooftop, the sting of Bakugo's lifelong scorn, the crushing weight of reality, it all began to fade, replaced by a dizzying, dangerous sense of purpose. What are you? Izuku asked one last time, his throat dry. There was a pause, a moment of profound silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then the voice answered, its tone infused with a sudden, immense gravity, a hint of a long-forgotten divinity. I am the whisper that plants doubt. I am the reason for the sideways glance. I am the grand cosmic joke at the heart of all things. I am the fire that burns the script and the chaos that breaks the stage. Some have called me Loki. But you may call me your teacher, Loki. The name meant nothing to him, a strange, foreign sound. But the title, teacher, that resonated. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the cool night air feeling like a shock to his system. He thought of his mother's worried face. He thought of a future of quiet resignation, of watching from the sidelines forever. He thought of the ashes of his dream. And then he thought of the offer. A chance to seize control, a chance to prove them all wrong, even if they never knew it. To be a hero in his own, twisted way. The choice was no choice at all. Okay, Izuku whispered to the shadows, the word a puff of white in the cold air. His voice was small, but it was filled with a terrible, unbreakable resolve. I accept. The instant the word left his lips, the world changed. It wasn't a thunderclap or a blinding flash. It was a subtle, fundamental shift in his perception. A faint, ethereal light, the color of new leaves and old gold, seemed to bleed from the shadows under the tree. It wasn't a physical light that cast shadows, but an internal one that seeped into his very being. It flowed into him, a cool, tingling sensation like plunging his hands into a mountain stream. He felt a connection snap into place in the back of his mind, a link to the ancient, amused consciousness that called itself Loki. And through that link he felt more. The world was no longer just a collection of objects he could see and touch. It was a tapestry of possibilities, of strings of cause and effect, of perceptions that could be bent and twisted. He could feel the loose paving stone a few meters away, not just with his feet, but as a point of potential instability. He could feel the intermittent flicker of the lamppost, not as a faulty wire, but as a rhythmic beat he could influence. Good! Loki's voice echoed, no longer outside him, but inside, a permanent resident in the architecture of his mind. The pact is sealed. The power is yours to command. Or rather, it is mine to lend. Now, for your first lesson. The art of the fortunate accident. Look, as if on cue, a new drama entered their secluded stage. A woman, clutching a purse and talking on her phone, walked briskly along the path at the edge of the park. A few paces behind her, a man in a hooded sweatshirt, his movements furtive and predatory, quickened his pace. The old Izuku would have panicked. He would have shouted, or run in recklessly, a quirkless child against the grown man. He would have become a victim or, at best, a temporary obstacle. The new Izuku stood perfectly still, his heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. Do not engage, Loki instructed, his voice a calm current in the sea of Izuku's thoughts. Observe. The man is focused on the purse. The woman is focused on her call. The stage is set. You are the director. You do not need a grand gesture. Just a nudge. Izuku focused not on the man, but on the world around him. He felt the strings. The man's trajectory would take him right over the loose paving stone. A little push, Loki whispered. Izuku didn't know how he did it. He just willed it. He imagined the edge of the stone being just a millimeter higher than it was. He imagined the man's perception of the ground to be perfectly flat. A lie. A tiny, insignificant lie told to a single person's subconscious. It happened exactly as Loki had described. The would-be mother's foot caught on the slightly raised edge of the stone. He stumbled forward with a grunt of surprise, his momentum carrying him off balance. Now the purse, Loki prompted. Izuku's focus shifted. He saw the way the purse strap was dangling. He saw the corner of the wooden bench. Another nudge. A subtle spatial distortion, a tiny warping of reality that made the strap snag perfectly on a splintered piece of wood. The purse was wrenched from the man's grasp as he fell. And for the finale, a spotlight. The man, now sprawling on the ground, pushed himself up, his face a mask of rage and confusion. He looked back at the purse, then towards the woman, who had finally noticed the commotion and screamed. He scrambled to get up and run. At that exact moment, Izuku focused on the flickering lamppost above. He pushed a sliver of his newfound energy into it. The lamp, which had been weakly sputtering, suddenly flared to brilliant, intense life, bathing the entire scene in stark white light. It illuminated the mother's face, his features contorted in panic, just as a police officer on his nightly patrol rounded the corner, drawn by the woman's scream. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. It was flawless. It was untraceable. To the woman, to the officer, to the mugger himself, it was just a string of incredibly bad luck. A clumsy thief foiled by his own incompetence. The officer had the man in cuffs within a minute. The woman, shaken but unharmed, was tearfully thanking him. No one even glanced at the quiet park, at the trembling boy standing in the shadows of a gnarled tree. Izuku's breath came in ragged gasps. His heart was pounding now, not with fear, but with something else. A dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating rush. He had done it. He had saved someone. He hadn't thrown a punch. He hadn't broken a bone. He hadn't even been seen. He had become a hero. And all it had cost was a little piece of the truth. A cold, coiling sensation settled in his gut. It felt like guilt, but it was wrapped in the intoxicating warmth of victory. He looked down at the ruined notebook on the bench, then back at the resolved crime scene. A smile touched his lips, but it wasn't the bright, fearless smile of all might. It was something smaller, sharper, and far more dangerous. "Well done, my student!" Loki's voice purred in his mind, full of approval. "The first of many beautiful lies. Our work has just begun." Izuku Midoriya stood alone in the dark, a god of mischief whispering secrets in his soul, the hero in his heart now at war with the trickster in his head. He had made a deal in the shadows, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that he would never be able to walk in the light again. The 10 months that followed were a crucible, forging Izuku Midoriya into something new and unrecognizable. On the surface, his life fell into a grueling but understandable routine. Every morning before dawn, he was at the illegally dumped trash heap that had tragically colonized the Goba Municipal Beach Park. To any casual observer, he was just a determined, slightly unhinged teenager engaged in a monumental act of community service. He hauled rusted refrigerators, dragged sodden couches, and meticulously sorted mountains of plastic and scrap metal, his body slowly hardening under the strain. But the physical labor was merely the canvas. The true work, the terrifying and exhilarating artistry, was happening inside his mind. His tutor was a relentless taskmaster. Loki, now a permanent resident in his psyche, treated the world as his personal classroom and Izuku as his sole, often frustrating, student. "Your mortal body is a pathetic vessel." Loki's voice would hum in his thoughts as Izuku struggled to lift a gnarled piece of machinery. "It aches, it tires, it complains. We must fortify the container if it is to hold anything of value. Consider this, manual labor, a necessary vulgarity. The sculptor must first quarry the stone, after all." Izuku's training in misdirection began with the smallest of lies. His first lesson took place in his own bedroom. He sat cross-legged on the floor, an all-might figurine clutched in his hand. "Forget what you see," Loki instructed, his voice a calm counterpoint to Izuku's frantic pulse. "Perception is not reality. It is a story the brain tells itself based on sensory input. We are not creating objects from nothing. We are simply becoming better storytellers. Now look at your plastic idol. See its garish colors. The bold red, the stark white, the brilliant blue. Now, tell a different story." Izuku stared at the figurine, his brow furrowed in concentration. He tried to will it to change, to become something else. Nothing happened. He squeezed his eyes shut, picturing it in his mind, painted a dull, lifeless gray. "Don't force it, child. You are trying to bludgeon the world into submission. That is Endeavor's method. Crude. Inelegant. You must persuade it. Seduce it. Find the little thread of possibility and pull. Whisper to the light that reflects off the surface. Convince it to forget the color blue. He tried again, relaxing his mind as Loki guided him. He didn't try to change the object itself, but his own perception of it. He let the divine energy, that cool green-gold current, flow from his mind, not as a wave, but as a mist. It felt like tuning a radio, searching for a frequency that existed just outside of normal hearing. He twisted a mental dial, and for a breathtaking second, the blue on the figurine's costume seemed to wash out, desaturating to a pale, cloudy gray. Then it snapped back. He gasped, the effort leaving him dizzy. A flicker, Loki noted, his tone holding no praise, only analysis. Pathetic but a start. The lie was not convincing enough. It lacked conviction. You must believe your own deception before you can expect reality to do the same. We will practice until you can make that toy look like it has wept, and so they did. For weeks, Izuku's evenings were spent in his room, surrounded by his heroic paraphernalia, learning to manipulate the very essence of what he saw. He learned to make a red pen look blue. He learned to make a solid wall appear to have a small, shimmering crack running down its length. He learned to make the scent of his mother's cooking in the hallway smell faintly of ozone and rain. His mother, Inko, noticed the change in him, but misinterpreted its source. She saw his new dedication to cleaning the beach, the burgeoning muscle on his wiry frame, and the dark circles under his eyes. She saw his quietness not as the silence of a boy wrestling with a god in his head, but as the grim determination of a son who had finally accepted his reality, and was trying to find a new purpose. She would leave extra food for him, her eyes full of a painful, loving pity that twisted like a knife in Izuku's gut. Every kind word from her felt like a condemnation of the secret he was harboring. He was lying to everyone, and the guilt was a constant, sour taste in his mouth. Guilt is the ballast of the common man, Loki chided him one afternoon as he watched his mother walk away. It keeps them anchored in mediocrity. You feel guilty because you are deceiving her. I say you are protecting her from a truth she could not possibly comprehend. Which is the greater kindness? The comforting lie or the devastating truth? This is the core of our philosophy, my boy. Do try to keep up. Months 3 and 4 were dedicated to auditory illusions. Izuku would sit at the beach, amidst the cacophony of crashing waves and crying gulls, and Loki would have him practice isolating sounds and creating new ones. He learned to project the sound of footsteps behind him where there were none, to make the cry of a gull sound like a sharp whistle, to whisper a single, phantom word on the wind. He started testing his burgeoning skills in small, harmless ways. He'd make a businessman walking past think he heard his phone buzz in his pocket. He'd make a couple on a date hear a faint strain of their favorite song on the breeze. Each successful deception was a small victory that chipped away at his guilt, replacing it with a craftsman's pride. He was getting good at this. He was building a skill set no hero in Japan possessed. The spatial warping, or blinking, as Loki called it, was the most physically demanding. The first time Izuku tried it, he focused on moving a single step to his left without moving his feet. The world dissolved into a nauseating, kaleidoscopic smear of color and light, and he promptly threw up the protein shake he'd had for breakfast. Your mortal coil is rebelling against a violation of its precious physics, Loki commented dryly from the sanctity of his mind. You are attempting to edit the punctuation of reality. It is bound to cause some disorientation. Try again. Smaller. Move a single pebble from here. Loki projected an image of a rock on his left. To there. An image of the same rock, a foot to the right. For a month, Izuku did nothing but this, moving small, inanimate objects short distances. The strain was immense. It felt like trying to flex a muscle he didn't know he had, a muscle located somewhere behind his eyes. It gave him splitting headaches and bouts of vertigo. But slowly, painstakingly, he gained control. He could blink a bottle cap from one end of a rusted car hood to the other. Then, he started blinking himself. First, just a few inches, which left him staggering. Then a foot. Then, after 8 months of relentless training, he could cross a 10-foot gap in the blink of an eye, arriving with only a mild wave of nausea. The final 2 months were a synthesis. Loki forced him to combine his skills. He would create an illusion of a person, hazy and indistinct at first, and then give it a voice. He would warp the space around a pile of trash to make it appear twice as large as it was. He was no longer just learning the notes. He was composing a symphony of deception. All the while, the beach became cleaner. The piles of trash shrank, replaced by reclaimed sand and the admiring gazes of the locals. All Might, in his skeletal form, would watch from a distance, his pride in the boy's diligence warring with a deep, unshakable confusion. He had told the boy to be realistic. He had expected him to give up. Instead, Izuku had taken his thoughtless words as a challenge and was performing a Herculean feat of public service, transforming his body in the process. Yagi Tashinori saw a vessel being prepared, a heart of impossible determination. He saw a worthy successor. He had no idea how right, and how wrong, he was. The day of the UA entrance exam arrived like a verdict. Izuku stood before the colossal gates of the most prestigious hero academy in the world, a sea of chattering, confident teenagers flowing around him. They were all showing off, little sparks of fire dancing on a fingertip, a girl with pink skin waving cheerily, a boy with engines in his calves stretching impatiently. Every one of them had a gift, a power that announced their worth to the world. Izuku's hands were empty. His power was invisible, a secret shared only with the ancient trickster god residing in his thoughts. Look at them. Loki's voice was a purr of contemptuous amusement. Peacocks in a barnyard. They display their strength so openly. They have no subtlety, no artistry. Today, my student, we will show them what true power looks like. We will not win. We will perform. Izuku took a deep breath, the familiar tendrils of anxiety tightening in his chest. But for the first time, he had something to push back with. He was not the same useless Deku who had been tormented by Bakugo just 10 months ago. He was an artist, and this was his gallery. He spotted Bakugo in the crowd, his usual sneer firmly in place. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Bakugo's gaze was full of dismissive rage. What the hell are you doing here, Deku? They letting in quirkless losers to cheer from the sidelines now? The old Izuku would have flinched, stammered, and fled. The new Izuku, channeling a sliver of Loki's theatrical confidence, simply gave a small, enigmatic smile. You'd be surprised what you can do when you're motivated, Kaken. The lack of fear on his face seemed to infuriate Bakugo more than any retort. Before he could explode, Izuku turned and walked into the auditorium, leaving his childhood tormentor momentarily speechless. The written exam was trivial. His analytical mind, honed by years of obsessive study and sharpened by Loki's mental exercises, sliced through the questions with ease. The real test, the one that mattered, was the practical. As he stood at the gates of Battle Center B, dressed in his tracksuit, he could feel the thrum of energy from the other examinees. The boy with the engines, Tenya Ida, was attempting to chastise him for his apparent lack of focus, but Izuku barely heard him. He was expanding his senses, feeling the layout of the artificial city beyond the walls. It was a grid, a chessboard. Perfect. The rules are simple, Loki mused. Break the toys, get the points. A game for children. But there is a hidden variable. Rescue points. 4 acts of true heroism. That, my boy, is our stage. Let them chase their brute force glory. We will play a more elegant game. The moment present, Mike yelled. Gee-oh! The other examinees hesitated. Izuku did not. He blinked. To the others, it looked like he simply vanished from the starting line. He reappeared 30 feet inside the city, a brief shimmer in the air his only trace. He was already moving before the others had processed the start signal. He rounded a corner and came face to face with his first opponent, a hulking one-point robot. It lunged, its metallic claws screeching. Izuku didn't dodge. He stood his ground, focused his mind, and lied. He projected a simple, powerful illusion directly into the robot's optical sensors, a deep, gaping chasm opening in the street directly in front of it. The robot's programming, faced with sudden and certain self-destruction, locked up. It screeched to a halt, its limbs spasming as its logic circuits tried to reconcile the visual data with the solid ground its feet were still touching. It was effectively neutralized, a babbling mess of confused code. Izuku ran past it without a second glance. 0 villain points. 1 saved bullet. He became a ghost in the city. He didn't seek out fights. He sought out opportunities. He saw a group of 3 two-pointers bearing down on a terrified girl with earphone jacks hanging from her lobes. Izuku hid behind a concrete pillar and went to work. With a subtle push of his will, he made the targeting reticle of the lead robot superimpose itself over the chassis of its compatriot. The robot fired its laser cannon, blasting its fellow machine to scrap metal. The third robot, turning to face the source of the betrayal, was met with a similar fate. The girl stared, bewildered, as the robots destroyed each other. A classic, Loki hummed with satisfaction. The seeds of discord. So much more effective than a punch. He accumulated rescue points with surgical precision. A boy was cornered, his hardening quirk not strong enough to withstand the combined assault of 2 three-pointers. Izuku, from a block away, created an illusory wall of solid chrome between them. The robots slammed into the non-existent barrier, their sensors screaming about a high-density impact. The boy, seeing his chance, scrambled away, throwing a grateful, confused look at the shimmering wall that vanished as soon as he was clear. In the observation room, the UE staff were utterly baffled. "Who is this kid?" a pro-hero asked, pointing at the screen following Izuku. "His quirk isn't even registered. Is it super speed?" "No, he's not running." Aizawa's eyes were narrowed, his usual apathy replaced by intense scrutiny. "It's not speed. He's displacing. But the energy signature is nothing. It's like the world just has a momentary hiccup around him. And look at the robots. They're malfunctioning, attacking each other. It's like he's a walking virus." Nizu, the principal, was watching with a gleam in his beady eyes, his paws steepled before him. "Or perhaps," he said, taking a sip of his tea, "he is simply a brilliant strategist with the luckiest quirk in existence." But his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. This was not luck. This was control. Izuku could feel their eyes on him, the unseen pressure of the judges. He was a specimen under a microscope, and he reveled in their confusion. He rounded another corner, and his heart stopped. A girl with a brown bob and round, rosy cheeks was lying on the ground, her leg trapped under a slab of concrete. And looming over her, casting a shadow that blotted out the sun, was the zero-pointer. The ground trembled with its every movement. It was a monstrosity of metal and wiring, a walking skyscraper designed to be an obstacle, not an opponent. Other examinees were fleeing, their faces pale with terror. The girl, Achiko Uraraka, looked up at the behemoth, her own face a mask of fear and resignation. Izuku's blood ran cold. The old fear, the instinct to run, screamed at him. But Loki's voice cut through the panic, sharp and ecstatic. "Ah! The grand finale! The audience is terrified, the damsel is in distress, the beast is unstoppable. They have set the stage for us, my boy. Do not disappoint me." A beast of that size does not rely on simple optics. It relies on seismic sensors, on structural analysis. You cannot fool just its eyes. You must fool its very soul. Give it a performance it will never forget. This was the ultimate test. A lie on a scale he had never attempted. The strain could break his mind. He didn't care. A person was in danger. He closed his eyes for a second, drawing on every ounce of the green-gold power coiling within him. He didn't focus on the robot. He focused on the ground beneath it. He poured his will into the concrete, the rebar, the very foundations of the artificial street. He built the illusion layer by layer, with the desperate speed of a master painter. From Uraraka's perspective, it began with a sound. A low, groaning protest, like the world itself was in pain. Then she saw it. Spiderweb cracks of brilliant, impossible light spread out from the base of the zero-pointer. The concrete began to buckle. The sound intensified, a cacophony of shattering rock and shrieking, tearing metal. She felt the vibrations not just from the robot steps, but from the very ground that was supposedly collapsing. The illusion was total, a multisensory masterpiece of catastrophe. The zero-pointer's massive head tilted. Its internal sensors, which were screaming about catastrophic structural failure beneath it, overrode its primary programming. Its one, glowing red eye fixated on the collapsing ground. With a screech of protesting metal, it took a stumbling step backward, trying to get to stable ground. The step was its undoing. Its immense weight, shifted unexpectedly, caused it to overbalance. It teetered for a horrifying moment, a metal giant against the sky, before it crashed backward, away from Uraraka, with a ground-shaking boom that was entirely real. The sudden silence was deafening. Izuku felt like his brain had been scooped out. The mental exertion was staggering. Black spots danced in his vision, and a wave of nausea threatened to cripple him. But he fought it down. He blinked to Uraraka's side, the short-range warp taking a monumental effort. He placed his hands on the slab of concrete pinning her leg. He couldn't lift it. He wasn't strong enough. But he could lie to it. He focused, pushing the last dregs of his power into the rubble. He didn't try to make it lighter. He simply created a subtle spatial warp, a little pocket of distorted physics that made the slab shift a mere 2 inches to the left. It was enough. Uraraka pulled her leg free, wincing in pain. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked, his voice strained. I think so," she breathed, staring at the fallen titan. What did you do?" "The ground. Time's up." Present Mix's voice boomed, shattering the moment. Izuku swayed on his feet, the adrenaline finally giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. He had done it. He had faced the impossible and won, not with strength, but with a story. A week later, a letter from Yue arrived. Izuku sat at his desk, his heart a frantic drum. He had told his mother he thought he had failed, a lie to temper her expectations and cover his own gnawing uncertainty. Did they see heroism, or just bizarre anomalies? He opened the envelope. A small metal disc fell out. It flickered to life, projecting a hologram of a beaming All Might. "I am here as a projection," the hero boomed. Izuku jumped. All Might spoke of the written exam, which Izuku had aced. Then he moved to the practical. "You scored a perfect 0 in villain points," he said, and Izuku's heart sank. But wait! The exam wasn't just about fighting villains. A screen appeared next to All Might, showing clips of his performance. The robots destroying each other. The shimmering, illusory wall. And finally, the grand finale with the 0-pointer. It showed Uraraka going to the judges afterward, asking to give some of her points to the plain-looking boy who had saved her. "Your actions inspired others. A true hero's quality," All Might declared. "For acts of heroism, for saving others at great personal risk, for showing a strategic mind unlike any we have ever seen. Izuku Midoriya, you have been awarded 70 rescue points. A new school record. Welcome, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia." Izuku burst into tears, a flood of relief so powerful it left him breathless. He had done it. He was in. But the hologram wasn't finished. All Might's expression grew serious. "There is one more thing. Young Midoriya, I have a personal interest in you. Meet me tomorrow morning at Dagoba Beach. There is something we must discuss." The projection clicked off. Well. Loki's voice was filled with a silken, predatory curiosity. "The god of this little pantheon wishes for a private audience. How intriguing. It seems your performance has earned you more than just a place in his school." The next morning, Izuku met the skeletal form of Yagi Tashinori on the now pristine beach. The hero looked at him, his gaze piercing. "Young Midoriya," he began. "For 10 months I have watched you. You took my careless words and used them as fuel to perform a miracle. You have a heroic heart, perhaps the most heroic I have ever seen. But the exam. I confess I do not understand what I saw. Your quirk, it seems to be the ability to create miracles." Izuku's mouth went dry. I just analyze things and get lucky, sir." All Might shook his head. "No. That was not luck. That was purpose. You have the heart of a hero, the body of a warrior, and the mind of a master strategist. But you lack the raw power to truly enforce your will. You saved that young girl, but you were at your absolute limit. What if there had been 2 0-pointers? He stood up, his form seeming to gain stature despite its frailness. He told Izuku of his secret, of his injury, and of his inherited quirk, a sacred torch passed down through generations. He spoke of one for all. "It is the crystallization of power, a quirk that stockpiles strength and can be passed to another." All Might explained, his voice thick with emotion. "And I, Izuku Midoriya, have chosen you to be my successor." He held out his hand. I want to give you my power. Izuku stared, his mind a maelstrom of shock. One for all. The power he had dreamed of his entire life. A power of truth, of justice, of overwhelming heroic force. It was everything his new abilities were not. It was an offer of redemption, a chance to be the hero he had always wanted to be, without the lies, without the tricks. But Loki's voice was a cold whisper in the storm. Accept it. What? Izuku thought, shocked. But this is a hero's power. A pure power. It's the opposite of you, precisely. Loki sounded giddy with dark amusement. A sacred torch, he calls it. What delicious irony! To place a divine flame in a lamp already lit with otherworldly fire, the power of order and the magic of chaos, together in one fragile mortal vessel. The sheer, beautiful, unpredictable pandemonium it could create. This is a jest on a cosmic scale, my boy. This is a gift. Take it. It will be our greatest trick yet. Izuku looked at All Might's earnest, hopeful face. He thought of the guilt that gnawed at him, and the thrill of the power he already wielded. To refuse would be insane. To accept was a betrayal on a level he couldn't even comprehend. He would be taking this sacred trust and tainting it with every breath he took. But it was All Might's power. It was his dream. With a trembling hand, he reached out. I accept. All Might beamed, pulling a strand of his blonde hair. Excellent! Now, eat this. Izuku, bewildered, took the hair. He swallowed it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then it began. It felt like a star being born in his stomach. A raw, blistering power, pure and white-hot, surged through his veins. It was the legacy of heroes, a chorus of voices crying out for justice. It was noble, it was righteous, and then it met the cool, coiling, ancient magic of Loki. The collision was apocalyptic. His mind became a battlefield. White-hot lightning, the power of one for all, clashed against swirling emerald and gold mist, the chaos of Loki's misdirection. It was a storm in his soul, a war between truth and lies, order and chaos, hero and trickster. The pain was immense, a psychic tearing that made him cry out and fall to his knees, clutching his head. All Might rushed to his side, alarmed. Young Midoriya! Are you all right? Izuku looked up, his vision blurry. Through the agony, he could feel the two powers not destroying each other, but merging. Twisting. Corrupting. The raw force of one for all was being infused with the deceptive nature of Loki's magic. The divine magic, in turn, was being anchored and amplified by the immense energy of the stockpiled quirk. He was no longer just a vessel for a trickster god. He was now the holder of a sacred trust. He was a lie wrapped in a truth, a paradox given flesh. He was a bomb waiting to go off, and as he looked at his hero's worried face, he managed a weak, shaky smile. The first act of his UA career would be the greatest deception of his life, pretending to be the worthy successor All Might believed him to be. The curtain was rising, and his performance was just beginning. The UA uniform felt like a costume for a play he hadn't fully rehearsed. The fabric was crisp, the gray of the jacket severe and official, the green accents of his tie a shade too close to the color that now bled through his soul. He had dreamed of wearing this uniform for a decade. He had imagined it would feel like armor, a symbol of belonging, of worthiness. Instead, it felt like a cage, a beautifully tailored prison of expectations he was now obligated to subvert from the inside. Posture, my boy! Loki's voice, a silken thread in the tapestry of his thoughts, chided him. You are walking to your coronation, not your execution. Shoulders back. Chin up. You are not a petitioner here, you are the hidden king. Act like it. Izuku subtly adjusted his stance, forcing a confidence he didn't feel into the lines of his body. He walked down the gleaming, cavernous hallway of UA, a place that was more myth than school in his mind. The sheer scale of it was designed to intimidate, to impress upon every student that they were now part of something monumental. Sunlight streamed through colossal windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, lost stars. He found the classroom door for Class 1A. It was ridiculously, absurdly large, probably to accommodate students with size-altering quirks. To Izuku, it felt like the gate to a new world, a final threshold between the boy he was and the lie he was about to become. He could hear voices from inside, loud and boisterous. His heart, that old, treacherous organ, began to hammer a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Anxiety is a useless indulgence," Loki said, his tone bored. "It is the fear of a future that has not yet happened. We are not afraid. We are writing the future. Now open the door." Taking a breath that felt too shallow, Izuku pushed the massive door open. The scene within was a snapshot of nervous, superpowered energy. A boy with bright red, spiky hair was laughing with another who had strange, lumpy elbows. A girl who was entirely pink was chatting animatedly. His eyes, however, were immediately drawn to a familiar conflict. The stern, blue-haired boy from the entrance exam, Tenya Ida, was robotically chastising Katsuki Bakugo for having his feet on his desk. "This desk is a sacred tool of our upperclassmen." Ida chopped the air with his hand. "To defile it with your footwear is an insult to them and to the very spirit of UA." Bakugo, leaning back in his chair with a lazy, arrogant sneer, didn't even deign to look at him. "What did you say, Four Eyes? You from some fancy-ass private school? You sound like a damn wind-up toy." He finally glanced over, his crimson eyes scanning the class with possessive disdain. And then they landed on Izuku, standing frozen in the doorway. Bakugo's sneer twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Deku?" he snarled, the name a gunshot in the relative quiet. Every head in the class turned. Izuku felt 100 pinpricks of attention on his skin. The old him would have withered, would have apologized for breathing, for existing. But Loki's influence was a cold, hard shell around his panic. He offered a small, placid smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, Kaken." The sheer, unexpected calm of his greeting threw Bakugo off kilter. The rage in his eyes was momentarily replaced by baffled confusion. Before he could formulate an explosive reply, a cheerful voice cut in. "Oh, it's you! Plain-looking boy!" Izuku turned to see the girl from the exam, Achiko Uraraka, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "That thing you did with the zero-pointer was amazing! The way the ground just cracked! It was incredible!" "I'm Achiko Uraraka." Ida, his attention diverted, sped over to them. "I am Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy," he announced. "I must apologize for my behavior at the exam. You discerned the true nature of the test while I did not. I misjudged you completely. As a student, you are clearly my superior." His formal, booming apology drew even more attention. Izuku was now the center of a small, curious crowd. The pressure was immense. "A performance, my student. The audience is rapt," Loki purred. Izuku gave a slight, self-deprecating shrug, a gesture he had practiced in the mirror for hours. It was designed to look humble while radiating quiet confidence. "It was nothing, really," he said, his voice smooth. "Just saw an opportunity. Glad you're okay, Uraraka-san." He met Ida's intense gaze. "And no need to apologize, Ida-san. We were all just trying our best." His demeanor was so jarringly different from the stuttering, mumbling boy Ida had confronted at the exam that it left him momentarily speechless. This boy was calm, articulate, and carried himself with an unnerving stillness. "If you're all just here to make friends, then you can pack up and leave." The new voice was low, tired, and utterly devoid of energy. It seemed to emanate from the floor near the door. Everyone turned to see a man lying on the ground in a yellow sleeping bag, looking like a giant, exhausted caterpillar. He took a long sip from a juice pouch before slowly, agonizingly, unzipping himself and standing up. He was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, with dark, unkempt hair, a scruffy beard, and eyes that held the profound weariness of 1,000 sleepless nights. "It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work," he said, his voice a monotone drone. "I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher." A collective wave of shock rippled through the class. This bedraggled man was a pro-hero. Aizawa rummaged through his sleeping bag and pulled out a blue gym uniform. "Put these on and meet me on the field." Immediately, the sun was bright on the pea grounds, casting sharp shadows. The air buzzed with the confused murmurs of the 20 students of Class 1A. "A quirk assessment test?" Uraraka exclaimed. But what about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? UA isn't bound by pointless traditions, Aizawa said, his back to them. As heroes, you won't have time for such pleasantries. You're here to become the best, and that starts now. He turned, his gaze sweeping over them, dark and serious. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high? Bakugo's ever-present scowl deepened slightly. 67 meters. Try it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed him a ball. Bakugo strode into the designated circle, a savage grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and with a guttural roar of "Die!" he unleashed a massive explosion, propelling the ball into the sky like a mortar shell. The blast of heat and pressure washed over the students. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class erupted. Whoa, 705 meters? That looks so fun! This is what UA is all about. Aizawa's expression soured. A dangerous glint entered his tired eyes. Fun? He repeated, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Unbelievable. His face hardened into a severe mask. Fine. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points across these 8 tests will be judged to have no potential. You will be immediately expelled. The silence that followed was absolute, cold, and terrified. Expelled? The class shouted in unison. Welcome, Aizawa said, a cruel, thin smile on his face. To your hero academia. Izuku felt a jolt of genuine fear, a cold spike that momentarily silenced even Loki. Expulsion. On the first day. This wasn't a game. This was a culling. Oh, this is marvelous! Loki's voice was alight with manic glee. A trial by fire! A threat of utter humiliation! This dreary man has a flair for the dramatic after all. This changes nothing, my boy, except now, we are not merely performing for a grade. We are performing for our very survival. Do not hold back. Dazzle them. Terrify them. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired against Ida. The engine quirk boy was already in a sprinter's stance, miniature exhaust chuffing from his calves. On your marks. The robotic prompter droned. A simple race. Loki mused. The goal is to get from A to B. The method is irrelevant. A short blink will suffice. Not your fastest. Just enough to be impossible. Ida shot off the line like a rocket, his engines roaring. For a split second, Izuku remained perfectly still. Then he blinked. From the perspective of the other students, it was baffling. One moment, he was at the starting line. The next, he was a dozen meters down the track, already running. He then blinked again, and then a third time, his movements jerky and unnatural, covering the distance in 3 distinct, instantaneous leaps. He crossed the finish line a full second before Ida. The timer beeped. 3.04 seconds, the robot announced for Ida. Then it focused on Izuku. It paused, as if its sensors were struggling. 0.08 seconds, a gasp went through the students. 0.08? A boy with a tail exclaimed. That's not possible. Ida stared at Izuku, his jaw agape. You teleported? Your quirk is teleportation? Izuku, panting slightly from the mental strain of 3 rapid blinks, just gave a small shrug. Something like that. A knack for finding shortcuts. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. He had been watching Izuku intently. The boy hadn't moved with the smooth velocity of a speed quirk. He had simply not been in the spaces between his start and end points. There was no energy signature, no ozone smell of displaced air. It was clean. Too clean. The first seed of deep, professional suspicion was planted. Test 2, grip strength. This was a test of raw, physical power. Izuku stepped up to the machine, his mind racing. He could, perhaps, create a micro-warp within the device's springs to make them compress further, but the risk of being discovered was too high. A test of brute force. How utterly pedestrian! Loki scoffed. Rely on the vessel for this one. We have already demonstrated the sublime. Now we show them the mundane. It will make you harder to define, Izuku nodded internally. He gripped the device, channeling the strength he had built over 10 months of hauling scrap metal on Dagoba Beach. He squeezed, his muscles straining. The device beeped. 110 kilograms. Respectable. Far more than a quirkless boy should have, but utterly dwarfed by the boy with multiple arms, Mizo Shoji, who broke the machine. It was enough to place him firmly in the middle of the pack for this test, a calculated act of mediocrity. Test 3, standing long jump. Again, a simple physical test. Izuku ran, jumped, and as he reached the apex of his arc, he applied a subtle nudge. Not a full blink, but a gentle, invisible push from a distortion in space behind him. It was like being carried forward by a phantom gust of wind. He sailed over the sandbox, landing neatly on the other side. It was a remarkable jump, but again, within the realm of possibility for some kind of kinetic or enhancement quirk. He was building his legend, one confusing, contradictory piece at a time. Test 4, repeated sidesteps. Pure agility. Here, he relied solely on his own body, his reflexes honed by Loki's mental exercises and his muscles strengthened by the beach training. He was quick, efficient, a blur of motion. His score was high, placing him near the top. He was demonstrating that he wasn't just a one-trick pony. He had speed, agility, and decent strength. He was a puzzle, and he could feel the eyes of his classmates, and, more importantly, his teacher, trying to piece him together. And so it went, through the seated toe touch and the distance run. Izuku carefully curated his performance, using his powers in subtle, untraceable ways, mixing in his genuine physical improvements to create a profile of a student with a versatile but undefinable quirk. The other students were a mix of awed, confused, and frustrated. Bakugo, in particular, was a thundercloud of simmering rage, his every success punctuated by a venomous glare in Izuku's direction. The quirkless, useless Deku he had known his entire life was gone, replaced by this calm, infuriatingly competent enigma. It was an affront to the natural order of his world. Then came the final test. The ball throw. Aoyama went first, his naval laser propelling the ball with a glittering twinkle. Uraraka, touching the ball, made it weightless and scored an infinity, with a gentle toss, drawing gasps of amazement. Everyone had their moment to shine. Then, it was Bakugo's turn again. His 705.2 was the number to beat for anyone with a power-based quirk. Finally, Aizawa called his name. Midoriya. You're last. Izuku walked into the circle, the small, hard weight of the ball feeling momentous in his hand. The entire class was watching. This was it. The final act of his debut performance. The infinity score from the girl was a lovely touch of cosmic irony. Loki's voice was electric with anticipation. But her infinity was one of negation. Weightlessness. A pretty parlor trick. We shall show them a true infinity. An infinity of absence. An infinity of what if. We will not send it up. We will send it away. Are you ready to merge the streams? Izuku's heart pounded. Merging the raw, untamed power of One for All with the subtle, reality-bending magic of Loki was still a new and terrifying process. He had practiced it only a handful of times, always with explosive, unpredictable results. During one attempt on the beach, he had tried to empower an illusion of a seagull. The resulting creature had shrieked with the voice of 1,000 dying stars and warped the sand around it into glass before dissolving. It was dangerous. It was volatile. It was perfect. He took a deep breath, flexing the fingers of his throwing arm. He could feel One for All buzzing beneath his skin, a caged sun screaming for release. It felt like truth, like justice, like pure, righteous power. He then reached for Loki's gift, the cool, quiet stream of green-gold energy. It felt like lies, like secrets, like the delicious pleasure of a perfectly executed con. As he began to wind up, Aizawa's eyes narrowed. You're not planning to break your arm again, are you, Midoriya? I've seen your file from the entrance exam. You can't afford to be a one-shot hero. Before Izuku could respond, Aizawa's hair lifted from his shoulders, his eyes glowing a menacing red. He had activated his quirk, Erasure. A normal quirk user would have felt their power vanish, leaving them suddenly, terrifyingly mortal. Izuku felt nothing. Aizawa's eyes widened in genuine shock. He could feel his quirk trying to find a purchase, trying to sever the connection to a quirk factor, but there was nothing to sever. It was like trying to erase a sentence that had never been written. Midoriya's power wasn't coming from his body. It was coming from somewhere else entirely. His little trick doesn't work on gods, my boy. Loki laughed, a sound of pure triumph in Izuku's mind. He is trying to turn off a light switch, but our power is the sun. Show him. Show them all. Seizing the moment of Aizawa's shock, Izuku acted. He let the power of One for All surge, not down his arm in a physical blast, but up, into his mind, using it as a colossal battery to fuel his spell. He poured that raw, heroic energy into a single, complex lie. He threw the ball. His arm didn't shatter. There was no explosion, no sonic boom. The throw itself was almost gentle. The ball left his fingertips, sailed about 10 feet into the air, and then, it vanished. It didn't fly off into the distance. It didn't shoot up into the stratosphere. One moment it was there, a white sphere against the blue sky, and the next it was simply gone. There was no sound. No ripple. Just a sudden, perfect, chilling absence. The space where the ball had been felt strangely empty, as if reality itself had forgotten it was ever there. The class stared, mouths agape. They had been expecting an explosion, a feat of strength. This silent, subtle vanishing act was far more unsettling. Aizawa's device, held in his trembling hand, beeped once, a high, lonely sound in the stunned silence. On its screen was a single, elegant symbol, infinity. The same result as Uraraka, but achieved in a completely different, completely terrifying way. Her infinity was a number so large it couldn't be calculated. His was a philosophical concept. The ball hadn't traveled an infinite distance. It had been removed from the equation entirely. Silence reigned for a long, heavy moment. Then Aizawa moved. He was on Izuku in a flash, his capture weapon, a scarf made of a carbon fiber and steel alloy, whipping around Izuku's body, binding him tightly. His hair was still floating, his red eyes burning with a desperate, furious intensity. Explain? No. Aizawa's voice was a low, dangerous growl, his face inches from Izuku's. I used my erasure on you. Point blank. It did nothing. Your quirk is not registered under any known classification. It does not appear to be an emitter, a transformation, or a mutant type. So I will ask you one more time, problem child. What? Are you? The fear was real this time, sharp and piercing. But his answer had been rehearsed. His expression, carefully crafted, was one of weary confusion. It's my quirk, sensei, Izuku said, his voice steady despite the steel alloy weapon crushing his ribs. He gave his fabricated power a name, a lie to anchor their suspicions. I call it misdirection. It's unreliable. I don't fully control it. Sometimes it works on people's minds, sometimes it seems to bend things a little. Erasure has never worked on it. I don't know why. It was a brilliant lie, constructed by a master of the art. It explained everything and nothing. It was a fog that would obscure the truth, full of just enough pseudoscientific nonsense to be plausible in a world of bizarre powers. Aizawa stared at him, searching his face for any hint of deception. He found none. Only a carefully constructed mask of earnest, troubled youth. He slowly, reluctantly, released his capture weapon, but the suspicion in his eyes did not fade. It crystallized into a hard, cold certainty. This student, Izuku Midoriya, was a problem on a scale he had not encountered before. He was not just a powerful child, he was a walking anomaly, a living loophole in the laws of their world. And Shota Aizawa hated loopholes. DKU! The roar shattered the tense atmosphere. Bakugo, his face contorted into a demonic visage of pure fury, launched himself forward, explosions already crackling in his palms. You've been lying to me, all this time. What the hell is that quirk? Tell me. His rage wasn't just about being surpassed. It was the rage of a man whose fundamental understanding of reality had been sledgehammered to pieces. Deku was quirkless. Deku was a pebble. Deku belonged beneath his feet. This thing in front of him was impossible, a contradiction that his mind refused to accept. Before he could reach Izuku, Aizawa's capture weapon shot out again, wrapping around Bakugo and neutralizing him instantly. "Stand down," Aizawa ordered, his voice flat but carrying an absolute authority that even Bakugo could not defy. "Stop acting like a child." The tests were over. The final scores were projected onto a large holographic screen. Izuku Midoriya was in first place. At the bottom of the list was Minoru Mineta, who burst into theatrical tears. "And I was lying," Aizawa said, his back to them as he erased the screen. "No one's going home. It was a logical deception to push you to your limits." The class breathed a collective sigh of relief, except for a very astute Momo Yayorozu, who correctly deduced the lie within the lie. As the class was dismissed to change, Izuku found himself the center of a vortex of curiosity. "Dude, your quirk is insane," said a red-headed boy named Kirishima. "So manly, indeed, it defies simple categorization," Ida added, pushing up his glasses. "A fascinating and powerful ability," Izuku responded with practiced humility, with witty deflections and vague half-truths, all while feeling the last of his energy drain away. The final spell had taken a toll. His head throbbed, and a familiar wave of vertigo washed over him. He felt hollowed out, an elaborate puppet whose strings were beginning to fray. He saw Todoroki, the boy with the mismatched hair and the powerful quirk, watching him from a distance. Todoroki's heterochromatic eyes held no warmth, no admiration. Only a cold, analytical curiosity. He wasn't looking at a classmate. He was looking at a variable, a potential threat on the chessboard. As Izuku walked back to the locker room, the adulation of his peers fading behind him, he was left alone with the voice in his head. "A masterful debut," Loki purred, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "First place. You have their attention. You have their admiration. And more importantly, you have their suspicion. You are the mystery at the heart of their little school." The perfect position from which to direct the play. Izuku leaned against the cool wall of the empty hallway, the facade finally cracking. He was trembling, not from cold, but from sheer mental and emotional exhaustion. He had passed the test. He had fooled them all. He had even lied to the god of lies by hiding just how much control he truly had. But the weight of it, the sheer, crushing weight of the lies he now had to maintain, was heavier than any refrigerator he had ever hauled. He had made his entrance. He had shown them a hero. But as he stared at his reflection in the polished gleam of the hallway floor, he saw only the faint, shimmering outline of a trickster, a beautiful lie that was just beginning to take shape. The bus ride to the unforeseen simulation joint was a cacophony of teenage energy. Izuku sat wedged between Ida's rigid, bolt-upright posture and Uraraka's bubbly enthusiasm, a small island of forced calm in a sea of excited chatter. He contributed to the conversation in carefully measured doses. A witty observation here, a thoughtful question there, all part of the persona he was meticulously constructing, the quiet, brilliant, but approachable prodigy. It was exhausting. "Listen to them." Loki's voice was a low, contemptuous murmur in the back of his mind, a constant counter-melody to the students' cheerful tune. "They prattle on about their flashy, predictable powers. My quirk is good for this. My quirk is strong against that. They are children comparing the sharpness of their new crayons, with no concept of the canvas. So limited." Tsuyu Ajui, the frog-like girl with a startlingly direct nature, turned her large, unblinking eyes toward him. "Midoriya-chan," she said, her tongue poking out thoughtfully, "your quirk is a lot like All Might's in terms of power, but the way you use it is completely different. It's very mysterious." "Kero." The bus fell quiet. It was the question on everyone's mind, the one they had been too polite or too intimidated to ask directly. Izuku felt a familiar spike of cold adrenaline. A direct comparison to All Might was the most dangerous ground he could tread. He offered a small, practiced smile, a mask of humble mystery. "I don't think it's anything like All Might's," he said, his voice soft but clear. "He's in a league of his own. My quirk, it's more about finding the path of least resistance. Sometimes that path is just a little strange." It was a perfect non-answer, vague and slightly poetic, designed to intrigue rather than inform. It worked. Kirishima chimed in, changing the subject to a more comfortable debate about whose quirk was flashier, and the moment of intense scrutiny passed. "Well spun," Loki commented, a hint of approval in his tone. "You are learning to dance on the edge of the blade." The bus arrived at the USJ, a massive domed facility that looked like a captured piece of the sky. Inside, the sheer scale of the place was breathtaking. Different climate and disaster zones were laid out before them like a theme park for doomsday preppers. A shipwreck in a storm-tossed lake, a burning cityscape, a landslide zone, a mountain pass. It was a playground of controlled calamity. They were greeted by the space hero, 13, their iconic suit making their gender and features a complete mystery. 13 spoke with passion about the nature of their own quirk, black hole, and how a power designed for destruction could be repurposed for rescue. It was a speech that, a year ago, would have brought tears to Izuku's eyes. Now, he listened with a detached, analytical coolness, cross-referencing 13's words with Loki's cynical philosophy. "See?" the god whispered. "Even she admits it. Her power is a gaping maw of annihilation. She simply slapped a rescue label on it, and now they call her a hero. It is all marketing, my boy. All of it." Aizawa was about to begin the lesson when the lights in the facility flickered and died. The central water fountain sputtered. A prickle of unease ran down Izuku's spine. This was not part of the simulation. Then, at the base of the central plaza, the air itself seemed to tear open. A swirling vortex of dark, smoky purple appeared, a wound in reality. From its depths, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them, villains. Not actors, not robots. The malice radiating from them was a palpable, suffocating force, and among them were 3 who stood out. A man whose entire body was made of the same purple mist as the portal. A young man with pale blue hair, his face and body obscured by a disturbing collection of severed hands that had been crudely affixed to him. And last, a hulking, monstrous creature with an exposed brain and dead, staring eyes, its muscles bulging unnaturally. It stood with the placid stillness of a taxidermied beast, but it radiated an aura of obscene, overwhelming power. "Stay back!" Aizawa barked, pulling his yellow goggles over his eyes. His usual apathy was gone, replaced by the razor-sharp focus of a cornered predator. 13, protect the students! Kaminari tried to get a signal out. The man of mist, the warp gator, flowed forward, expanding like a storm cloud. "We are the League of Villains," he announced, his voice smooth and cultured, a horrifying contrast to the rogues gallery behind him. "We have taken the liberty of inviting ourselves to this bastion of heroes to have a little chat with the symbol of peace. We were under the impression he would be here today. Has there been a change in the schedule?" His voice held a note of genuine, peevish disappointment. The man with the hands, Tamura Shigaraki, began to scratch his neck, a dry, rasping sound that set Izuku's teeth on edge. "Oh well," he rasped, his voice thin and childish. "If he's not here, maybe he'll show up if we kill a few of his students." The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. This was real. This was a full-scale, organized attack on Yui itself. Izuku's mind, which should have been reeling with panic, instead became a sanctuary of preternatural calm. The adrenaline that surged through him was a cold fire, sharpening his senses. The world slowed down. He wasn't a terrified student anymore. He was the director, and the play had just taken an unexpected, bloody turn. "Ah, a proper debut!" Loki's voice was electric with a connoisseur's delight. "Forget your little tests and your schoolyard games. This is the stage. Look at them! A proper troupe of villains, a damsel of a hero to protect the children, and a ticking clock. It's perfect. Now, my student, let us show them what true chaos looks like." Aizawa leaped into battle, a whirlwind of motion and capture tape, his erasure quirk flickering through the mob of low-tier villains, neutralizing them one by one. But he was just one man. The warp gator, Kurojairi, surged forward, his misty form enveloping the students. "I will scatter you," he declared. "And you will be tortured and killed by my comrades!" The world became a vortex of purple and black. Izuku felt a disorienting lurch as space twisted around him. He didn't fight it. He leaned into it, using his own burgeoning control over spatial mechanics to observe Kurojairi's technique. It was crude, powerful, but imprecise. a sledgehammer to his scalpel. He found himself hurtling through the dark, not alone. He felt the presence of Azuri and Mineta near him. He reached out with his power, a subtle nudge, a gentle persuasion on the chaotic currents of the warp. He wasn't strong enough to divert their course entirely, but he could influence their destination. He aimed them away from the conflagration zone and the landslide zone, where they would be at a severe disadvantage. He aimed them toward the water. They materialized in a sickening lurch, plunging into the cold, churning water of the shipwreck zone. Izuku surfaced, gasping, his uniform instantly waterlogged and heavy. A short distance away, Mineta was screaming in terror, while Azuri was already in her element, her frog-like abilities making her a natural swimmer. A villain with a shark-like mutation grinned, his teeth like rows of daggers. Fresh meat for the grinder! The boat in the center of the lake was surrounded by a dozen water-based villains. They were cornered. Trapped. This is it! We're going to die! Mineta wailed, clinging to a piece of floating debris, the purple spheres on his head trembling with fear. Calm down, Tsuyu said, her voice steady. We need to assess the situation, but Izuku was already assessing. He wasn't just looking at the villains. He was looking at the entire environment. The churning water, the metal hull of the ship, the fear in the villains' eyes. They were confident. Overconfident. Their greatest strength was their numbers and their control of the water. So that is what he would take from them. The stage is set, Loki whispered, his voice a coiling serpent in Izuku's mind. The audience is hostile. Time for some special effects, Tsuyu-chan, Izuku said, his voice low and urgent. Can you get Mineta and me to the boat? Of course. Kero, she replied, her long tongue shooting out and wrapping around their waists. With a powerful kick, she propelled them through the water, depositing them on the slick, rusted deck of the ship. The villains began to converge, their laughter echoing across the water. Stay here, Izuku told them, his eyes scanning the approaching enemies. And don't panic, no matter what you see. He closed his eyes, drawing on his power. He felt the cold, familiar fusion of One for All's raw energy acting as a massive amplifier for Loki's delicate, deceptive magic. He wasn't creating a simple illusion for one or two people. He was telling a new story to the entire zone. The first change was the smell. A sharp, acrid scent of ozone and chlorine began to permeate the air, a smell that tickled the back of the throat. Then came the sound. The gentle lapping of the water against the hull began to change, morphing into a low, menacing hiss, like 1,000 kettles about to boil. The villains paused, their confident smirks faltering. One of them, a man with gills, sniffed the air. What is that smell? And then Izuku delivered the visual punchline. He focused on the water, on the perception of every villain surrounding them. He didn't try to change the water itself. He changed what they saw. The deep blue of the water began to bubble, not with air, but with a sickly, shimmering green. Pockets of steam, entirely illusory, began to rise from the surface. The water around the ship, in a 20-foot radius, now appeared to be a roiling, boiling cauldron of corrosive acid. The lie was so potent, so multisensory, that it was indistinguishable from reality. The villains recoiled in horror. Acid! The water is turning to acid! One of them shrieked, scrambling back. My quirk! It's burning me! Another cried out, clutching his arm, even though nothing was touching him. His own mind was creating the phantom sensation of pain, convinced by the overwhelming sensory data. Panic, swift and absolute, shattered their ranks. They clawed at each other, desperate to get away from the acid, their advantage of being in the water instantly transformed into a terrifying trap. Mineta stared, his eyes wide with disbelief. Holy, what is your quirk? Misdirection, Izuku said, his voice strained from the effort of maintaining such a large-scale illusion. He then turned his attention to Tsuyu. Tsuyu-chan, your tongue. How far can it reach? Pretty far, she said, still stunned. Good. He pointed to the now panicked mob of villains. Grab them. All of them. And pile them in the center of the ship. What followed was a bizarre, almost comical scene. Tsuyu's tongue shot out, snagging the flailing, terrified villains and yanking them out of the boiling acid, depositing them onto the deck. They were so grateful to be saved from the imaginary threat that they offered no resistance. Within a minute, a dozen villains were piled in a whimpering, shivering heap, bound by Mineta's super sticky spheres. The shipwreck zone was neutralized. Not a single punch had been thrown. It had been won with a smell, a sound, and a change of color. It was terrifyingly effective. Tsuyu looked at Izuku, her usual placid expression replaced with one of profound awe and a sliver of fear. Midoriya-chan, that was... We need to move. Izuku interrupted, the illusion fading as he released his focus. The water returned to its normal blue, the air to its normal salty scent. The mental strain was immense, leaving him feeling lightheaded. Aizawa-sensei is in trouble. He looked toward the central plaza. His heart sank. Aizawa was still fighting, a lone warrior against the tide, but he was slowing down. And the three main villains, Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and the hulking beast, the Noma, hadn't even moved. They were just watching. Waiting. We need to help him, Izuku said, his voice hard. We can't fight them head-on. Especially not that big one. The brute is a living shield, Loki observed, his analysis cold and precise. Notice how the hand-covered one and the mist man stay behind it. It is their guard dog, but the true threat is the child with the decaying touch. His quirk is entropy. A touch of death. He is the king on this chessboard. Izuku knew Loki was right. Fighting the Noma was pointless. It was a weapon, not a person. The key was its master, Shigaraki. A man-child wrapped in severed hands, scratching his neck like a feral animal. He was unstable. And instability was a weakness Izuku could exploit. I have a plan, Izuku said to Tsuyu and Mineta. It's risky. But it's the only way. He explained his idea in quiet, urgent tones. Their job was to create a diversion, to draw the Noma's attention for just a few crucial seconds. His job was to get close to Shigaraki. Leaving the subdued villains on the ship, the trio made their way to the edge of the plaza, hiding behind the wreckage of the fountain. They could see the final moments of Aizawa's heroic stand. Shigaraki dashed forward with horrifying speed, his hand outstretched. He touched Aizawa's elbow. The fabric of the hero's costume crumbled to dust, and his skin beneath began to crack and flake. Aizawa roared in pain, but managed to slam Shigaraki's face into the ground. The Noma moved. It was a blur of unnatural speed. It grabbed Aizawa, smashing him into the concrete with sickening, repetitive crunches. The sound of breaking bones echoed across the plaza. It was now or never. Now! Izuku hissed. Tsuyu launched Mineta into the air. He rained down his sticky purple spheres, trying to pin the Noma. It was a futile gesture, but it was the diversion Izuku needed. As the Noma turned its dead eyes toward the new threat, Izuku moved. He blinked, a series of short, disorienting jumps that carried him across the plaza, arriving silently behind Shigaraki, who was still gloating over the broken form of Aizawa. Izuku didn't announce his presence. He didn't shout a challenge. He reached into Shigaraki's mind. It was a cesspool. A swirling vortex of childish rage, petulant entitlement, and a deep, gnawing insecurity that was terrifying in its intensity. And beneath it all, there was one singular, overwhelming presence, the shadow of his master, a figure he both craved approval from and deeply feared. All for one. Izuku didn't need to invent fears for Shigaraki. He just had to amplify what was already there. Give the child a taste of his own medicine, Loki whispered, his voice laced with venomous delight. Show him what true decay looks like. Izuku wove a new illusion, a personal nightmare tailored just for Shigaraki. It wasn't a grand, sweeping spectacle. It was intimate. It was insidious. Shigaraki felt a sudden, phantom itch on his own hands, the ones that were still attached to his arms. He looked down. To his horror, he saw his own skin begin to crack and flake away, just like Aizawa's elbow. The decay was crawling up his arms, his own quirk turning against him. He gasped, stumbling back. Then the hands that adorned his body began to change. The severed, lifeless thing seemed to twitch. The father hand covering his face suddenly felt cold and heavy, its dead fingers tightening their grip. He tried to pull it away, but it wouldn't move. Whispers, faint and accusatory, began to echo in his mind. They were the voices of the people whose hands he wore. Murderer. Failure. Weakling. And then, the final, crushing blow. He saw a flicker of an image in his peripheral vision. A tall, imposing man in a dark suit, his face obscured by medical tubing. The figure of All for One. But the image was distorted, warped by Shigaraki's own fear. The unseen face was contorted in a sneer of profound disappointment. You have failed me, Tamura. A voice, a perfect imitation of his master's, echoed in his skull. You are still just a petulant child playing with toys, Shigaraki screamed. It wasn't a cry of rage or defiance. It was a raw, terrified shriek of a child having a waking nightmare. He clawed at the hand on his face, stumbling backward, his eyes wide with unseeing terror, completely oblivious to the real world around him. He was trapped in a prison of his own insecurities. Kurojairi, seeing his master's distress, immediately tried to intervene. Tamura Shigaraki. What is it? But before the warped villain could move, the entrance to the USJ exploded inward. And standing there, silhouetted against the daylight, was All Might. He was not smiling. His face was a mask of cold, righteous fury. I am here. The arrival of the symbol of peace was the breaking point. The low-tier villains, already unnerved by the attack, began to panic. But Izuku wasn't finished. He had one last trick up his sleeve, a grand flourish to complete his masterpiece of chaos. He drew on the last of his reserves, the fusion of OFA and Loki's magic making his head spin. He cast his widest, boldest illusion yet. He didn't just project it into the villains' minds, he projected it into the very air of the USJ. From behind All Might, more figures began to emerge from the smoke. First 2. Then 5. Then a dozen. An army of UA's top pro-heroes, Endeavor, Best Jeanist, Edge-Shot Hawks. They stood shoulder to shoulder with All Might, a phalanx of unbeatable power. It was, of course, a complete and utter lie. All Might was alone. But the illusion was perfect. The morale of the villains didn't just break. It atomized. The sight of the entire hero pantheon arrayed against them was too much. They threw down their weapons. They tried to flee. They trampled each other in a desperate, disorganized rout. Shigaraki, momentarily snapping out of his personal hell, saw the illusionary army. His terror turned to pure, sputtering rage. They cheated, he screeched. They cheated. All Might, seizing the opening, moved. He blurred across the plaza, snatching up the broken body of Aizawa and getting the students to safety in the blink of an eye. Then he turned to face the Noma. The battle that followed was legendary. It was a clash of titans, a hurricane of fists that shattered the very ground. But All Might was at a disadvantage. He was fighting to protect the students, and his time limit was ticking down. Izuku watched, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done his part. He had sown the seeds of chaos, disrupted their command structure, and shattered their morale. He had done it all without anyone even realizing he was the cause. To everyone else, Shigaraki had simply had a psychotic break, and the villains had panicked at the sight of All Might. As All Might struggled against the Noma's shock absorption, Izuku saw a flicker of an opening. He was too weak for another grand illusion, but maybe, just a whisper. He focused on the Noma. Its brain was exposed, its mind simple, programmed. He couldn't create a complex illusion, but he could plant a single, distracting thought. He projected the image of a fly, a buzzing, annoying insect, flitting right in front of the Noma's dead eyes. It was a stupid, insignificant thing. But for a fraction of a second, the Noma's programmed brain registered the anomaly. Its eyes twitched, trying to follow the non-existent fly. That fraction of a second was all Might needed. Go beyond! Plus ultra! He roared, and delivered a punch so powerful it blasted the Noma up through the dome of the USJ and into the sky. The remaining villains, Shigaraki and Kurojairi, were cornered. But before All Might could capture them, Shigaraki, still muttering about ghosts and whispers, was warped away by Kurojairi, leaving behind a final, chilling threat. This isn't over. The battle was won. The USJ was a wreck, but the students were safe. The real heroes, UA's staff, arrived to find a bizarre scene, a defeated army of villains, a broken but living Aizawa, and a triumphant, yet visibly steaming, All Might. No one had seen the puppet master. Later, as they were being accounted for by the police, All Might pulled Izuku aside, his skeletal form trembling. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice low and grave. "What happened to the main villain? Shigaraki?" The other said he just started screaming. And the other villains swore they saw the rest of the UA staff with me. Izuku met his idol's gaze, his face a perfect mask of innocent confusion. "I don't know, All Might. It was all so chaotic. When you showed up, it was like your very presence was enough to make them lose their minds. It was the most plausible lie. A lie that fed the legend of the symbol of peace. A lie that protected his secret." All Might nodded, though a deep, troubled look remained in his eyes. The raw power of OFA within him, the vestige of his master Nana Shimura, had felt a strange, cold resonance during the battle, a ripple of ancient, mischievous power that had nothing to do with heroes or villains. It was something other. He dismissed it as a side effect of his stress. As Izuku stood with his classmates, wrapped in a shock blanket he didn't need, he felt a profound, chilling sense of victory. He had controlled the chaos. He had turned a battlefield into his personal stage. He had saved everyone, but his methods were a dark secret that he would carry alone. He had acted as a hero, but he had won as a trickster. And in the silent, echoing chambers of his mind, he could hear the sound of a single entity, a god of mischief, giving him a standing ovation.